What is going on, guys, and welcome to my review of The Last of Us HBO series. For those that may have been living under a rock, The Last of Us is a PlayStation video game that came out back in 2013 and has been one of the most celebrated, one of the most acclaimed video games of all time. Of course, we got the sequel a couple of years ago, and now we have a full-on adaptation into a series on HBO. And as we all know, video game adaptations have a horrible track record. We have had a couple that have been good. We have not had any that have been great, and the vast majority of them have been absolute garbage. So for somebody that adores The Last of Us, that's my third favorite video game of all time, and it is my favorite story from a video game of all time, I have had massive expectations for this adaptation. Everything that I've seen, from the trailers to production stills to the casting announcements to interviews with Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, the showrunners, and Neil Druckmann was the lead developer and the lead writer for the video game itself. Everything has given me all the faith in the world that this might actually finally be the one. The Last of Us might be that video game adaptation that finally gets it right and hopefully shepherds this new generation of video game adaptations that are finally done right. So obviously, with all that being said, I have put a lot of pressure onto the success of this show. I have put a lot of expectations onto the success of this show, and being that I'm a massive fan of this property, you might think that I'm more biased to like this than other people, and I can assure you I'm actually quite the other way. I'm going to be more critical on this than most people might be, which is what excites me so much to tell you guys that, as far as I'm concerned, this is without a doubt the greatest video game adaptation that has ever been created, and is in fact one of the best adaptations ever created. Period. Every single expectation that I set on this series was either matched or surpassed. And every single thing that I wanted this thing to do, everything that I needed it to do, it did in spades. So let's start talking about the positives regarding The Last of Us HBO series, and the biggest success that I can give to this adaptation is that it's the one that finally figured out how to balance appealing to the pre-established fans of the property, of the video game, of the story, of these characters, while absolutely opening itself up to be able to appeal to people that have no idea what The Last of Us is. The vast majority of video game adaptations that we have got in history have pretty much all leaned onto this side, to where they take the name, they take the characters, they take some of the elements of the video game, and they make something completely new and unrecognizable to appeal to people that have no idea what these things are supposed to be. And almost without exception, every single one of them completely alienates the fan base of that property. The few exceptions on the other side is something like, just a couple of years ago, we got Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, that leaned all the way into fan base. It was all about Easter eggs and visuals and completely recreating the settings of the video game and little winks and nods all throughout the movie, and completely abandoning everybody that has no idea how cool all of that stuff is. So you get a video game fan that walks in and watches it and they're going, dude, they did it. They nailed that. That's perfect. That's exactly how I remember it back in the 90s. And everybody that doesn't have those memories is going, I have no idea what the fuck I'm looking at. What's the appeal of this? It's just another zombie thing. The Last of Us manages to take everything that you love about that original video game, about that story, all of the story beats, the different chapters, the side characters, the interactions, even the smaller, more intimate moments, and translates and adapts that to the screen in a way where all throughout it, you're just feeling your heart get touched as a fan, going, oh my God, they get it. This is clearly somebody that loves this material, that understands this material, that understands why it has become one of the most acclaimed video games of all time. And at the same time, I watch it and I go, somebody that has no knowledge of any of these stories or characters or this universe is going to jump in and be able to follow this and hit all of the same emotional beats that I did back in 2013. Every single major moment of this story is translated and adapted into this show. Every single emotional gut punch moment is adapted into this show. And like I already mentioned, even the smaller moments that, much like I was describing with Welcome to Raccoon City, could completely go over the heads of everybody that's watching this fresh with no knowledge of the video games. But these are the moments where the fans of the games are going to feel like this was made for us. When you have scenes where Ellie pulls out a joke book called No Pun Intended Volume 2 and starts to riff out all these terrible jokes. When you have a moment where the characters walk into this underground community and there's a chalk drawing of a castle on the wall and a piece of paper stuck to the wall with 2 stick figures and one of them named Ish. These little moments that are translated from the video game that are missable moments that some people that have played the game never even got to experience because they're optional. And they took the time to adapt them into this show. There are so many moments like that that it almost made me want to cry. Like I'm watching it and going, this is it. This is how easy it is to do this. Why have we struggled for decades for somebody to understand that this is how you do it right? I feel like it's something that us video game fans have been screaming from the mountaintops for years and years at this point. It's like, why don't you do this? Why are you not listening? Why are you not giving what this property deserves? Why do you not care about it? Why do you not love it in the way that you should if you're adapting it? The Last of Us is finally the one that shows you how it can be done and how it can be done right. And one of the most important elements to delivering this story and delivering these emotional moments throughout one of the best stories ever told, in my opinion, is the casting of these characters. And that is something that this show did absolutely perfectly, all across the board, from the 2 leads to every single side character that you interact with throughout these 9 episodes. Everybody is perfectly cast to these roles. Pedro Pascal is awesome as Joel, and he brings a very different flavor to Joel. There's a little bit more of a vulnerability, a little bit more of a somber tone to Joel in the series, in my opinion, to where he seems more regretful of his past, of the life, of the things that are only hinted at, the things that they had to do to stay alive when the world went to shit. And so there's so many moments throughout the series to where Pedro brings everything that you want from the character of Joel that we have grown to love since 2013, but he also brings he colors it just a little bit differently in certain spots, with his interactions with Ellie, with his interactions with Marlene and with Tess, and the way that he responds to the world that is The Last of Us. It's a perfect representation of everything that Joel is, every complicated piece of what that character is. And yet it gives you just a little bit something different that we haven't gotten from him before. And I think his take on the character actually gives an opportunity to give a lot more impact to the violent side of Joel within the live action version. Because all throughout the video game, I mean, you're mowing down people left and right, you're beating the living hell out of these infected. I mean, there's so many extended sequences where you're just murdering things all throughout this game. And obviously the TV show is not going to be able to adapt every single little gameplay sequence. And so the violence, the gunplay, and the death is a little bit more spread out throughout the story. And when you get those explosive moments of violence, when you get those, seeing red moments out of Joel, it kind of expands the parameters of his character a little bit, where he's so quiet and somber and focused, and then you just see this monster come out, and you're like, oh, that's the dude that he keeps saying that he used to be, that he might not want to be anymore. I get it. That dude's a little scary. And as much as I adore what Pedro did, the standout for me was easily Bella Ramsey as Ellie. I think she nailed this character. And from what I've read, she didn't play the video game. She was actually instructed not to play the video game so that she was more capable of bringing her own flavor to this character. And somehow she was able to nail every single little nuance within the character of Ellie, while also bringing a bit of a different shade to it, just the same way that Pedro did. I mean, you have that young naivety, you have the bit of a smart-ass sense of humor, you have the explosive moments of profanity from her, you have this just piss and vinegar attitude. I mean, everything that you kind of would want from the character of Ellie if you were to write out her personality on paper is brought to life by Bella in spades.
She so much as twitches.
Her chemistry with Joel, her Pedro Pascal, is amazing, and the way that it evolves throughout this series is the same way that it evolves in the video game, where it's kind of this reluctant working relationship at first, and then there's a bit of a codependency stage to where they're just all that each other has, and then you very much have this father and daughter relationship that buds by the last third of the series that, like I said, those are the things that completely brings all of those emotional moments and the journey that you were supposed to go on with this story to life in a way that it's exactly the same way that we all experienced it while holding a controller. And like I said, all the side characters I think were casted perfectly. The one that I definitely want to give a shout out to, though, is Gabriel Luna. I have not seen this guy since Terminator Dark Fate. I thought he was awesome in that. I thought he was easily the best villain in that franchise since the T-1000. Unfortunately, most people do not like that film, and whatever. But Gabriel Luna in this nailed the character of Tommy while again bringing something different to it. And I found myself kind of understanding and connecting with his version of the character in the show more than I did in the video game. Because in the video game, they have a very tumultuous relationship, Joel and Tommy. You know, a very older brother, little brother, and they have two completely different worldviews, and you know, it's like oil and water whenever they try to come together on an idea. And that's very much prevalent in the show, but I just felt like I understood Tommy's motivations. I understood why he decides to be the person that he has become within this new world, this apocalyptic world. And so all the different elements that we got for the character of Tommy through Gabriel Luna's performance, I really appreciated as a fan of the game. And one of the things that I was most impressed by, which is probably attributed to having the developer of the game on staff as a co-showrunner, is their ability to really focus on what elements of the game are important to bring into this adaptation and what elements can we leave behind. Mostly extended gameplay sequences, because when you think, a lot of fans are very close-minded. They think you have to make every single moment of this thing adapted, otherwise you fucked it up. But when you think about games like The Last of Us, how many segments are we just walking around? How many segments are we just sneaking around clickers? How many times are we just having a pallet and we're moving Ellie across a piece of water? All of these things, you start chopping out those sections of gameplay and you really look at the meat of what you have left. And that's what they were able to do without feeling like they've lost those smaller, more intimate, more character and relationship developing moments that those gameplay segments certainly gave us as a gamer. And going along with that, the way that they were able to structure the story that they decided to tell into 9 episodes, I think they have an extremely well-paced season of television. The way that they were able to take chapters of the video game and know which ones to put together to make a solid hour to hour and a half episode of television that's going to be satisfying every single week at giving you a standout moment that people are going to be talking about for the next 6 days online, while also leaving you off at a moment that makes you immediately want to watch the next episode, and you're going to be sitting at the edge of your seat until the following Sunday when you get to see it. The way they were able to structure it that way, it was just so exciting for me, to where I actually watched my screeners twice before I reviewed this. I experienced the show over a couple of nights when I first watched it, just to kind of absorb it and let it last as long as I could stand. And then just yesterday, all day Sunday, I sat and just watched the show from start to finish in nearly one setting. And it was phenomenal. There was no point where I was like, okay, I've had enough. I just could not stop watching this show. In what I assume will be one of the most concerning pieces of adapting a video game for most of the video game fans watching this, I think the minor to medium changes that they implemented in this to bring it to an on-screen adaptation were not only necessary, but they were a really nice counterpoint to the video game. And that's where you're going to lose people. That's going to be the element that you're probably going to see the most debate on in the comment section, over Twitter, or wherever fans decide to discuss this series as they're watching it, is the things that aren't exactly like the video game. You get small things, you get a little bit of expansion on side characters, you get a little bit more backstory, or the side characters get a little bit more of a focus in that episode that they are a part of than they were in the game. You have some elements here that are just kind of focusing on the overall world, like certain sequences or openings to episodes that are kind of fleshing out how the world has responded to the cordyceps virus and the apocalypse that certainly were not in the video game, but flesh out this world in a TV show format very well. The way that they've toned down the violence for the show as opposed to the video game, because we don't have those extended sequences of shooting and sneaking and stealth kills and bludgeoning and all of that stuff. I think works really well in the show because just like what I was saying with Pedro's performance, it makes those explosive moments a bit more impactful when they do happen. And probably the biggest one that I've seen everybody freaking out about online is the omission of spores, which if you haven't played the video game, spores are like an airborne segment of this virus to where you have to wear gas masks and it clouds up the visuals. It's almost like being a fireman in smoke. And so from a visual front, it creates these tense sequences within the video game. And I think it would have been a cool visual thing to have in the show, but what they replace it with is this concept that they did not get a chance to bring into the games, which are tendrils, where the cordyceps virus has burrowed into the world, concrete walls, floors, which are certainly visually represented in the games, but they're not just there for visual. If you step on these things, if you bump into them, they're almost like a hive mind, and it lets infected in the near area know, oh, somebody just stepped on, go get them, get their ass now. And so it creates the tension and the ferocity of those sequences that the spore sequences in the games had, but in a very different way that I really liked. I thought it was a really cool alternate version of that as a counterpoint for the show. So I think even the most hardcore fans, which I certainly would put myself in that category, are gonna watch this show, and while they might wince, they might be a little bit guarded about some of the changes, by the end of it, when you see the grand scheme, when you see the whole picture, I think they were necessary changes, and I think that they were done very well. And finally, the last couple of positives, the production value and the set design on this show, I think are immaculate. Now, they've released that information. They've spent nearly as much on this show, if not a little bit more, than some of the seasons of Game of Thrones, which is pretty astronomical for a budget of TV, and you see where all that money went. I mean, the way that they have created the quarantine zones of Boston and a couple other cities, the way that they have created this dilapidated version of the US and various points of the US, the way that they have visually represented the cordyceps virus and, the post-apocalyptic look that is very green and very, filled with flora. I just think it was awesome. I think it was absolutely perfect. And the screeners that I watched weren't even finished. So when you finally see the show in its finished format, it's gonna look even better for you. And the score of this show, it's the same exact composer as the video game. I mean, it's one of the best scores of all time as far as video games. And it hits all the same exact moments, the same exact emotional beats in the show. Just the opening sequence itself, the title sequence with that The Last of Us theme, I swear to God, when I first saw the opening title sequence and heard that score, it gave me chills, and I held back tears. I was just like, oh my God, like, I'm 5 minutes into this adaptation and already I feel like I've been given everything that I need. And now moving on to the mixed aspects of The Last of Us series, and I have two things I need to discuss here. Now, before I get into it, as the thumbnail has shown you, I genuinely think that this adaptation is flawless. There is nothing here that I can call out as a flaw. There's nothing here that I said could be done better, should be done better, should not have been done, or should have been done differently. In my mind, for what I wanted and what I needed from this show, they delivered an absolutely perfect experience for me as a fan. But there are a couple of things that I do have concerns about how people are going to take it and where the show is going to go in the future. So the first thing I'll discuss is Bill's episode. Now, there's already been a little bit of discussion about this online because there's been reports that, Neil Druckmann has said and has released little statements saying, yeah, his episode's going to be very different. Fans might not like it. And that's absolutely true. The only episode of this 9-episode series that is wildly different than the video games is Bill's episode. There's changes here and there, small to medium as I was discussing, but as far as a very different representation of that character and a very different representation of his segment in the story, that is the one episode that stands out as a completely different thing than the video game. And so naturally, it's going to be a divisive episode. You're going to have people that love it, that really like the counterpoint to the video game, that like how differently we get to experience this character, how differently he's portrayed, and what we get to learn about him that we did not get a chance to learn or develop in the original story. And they're going to enjoy the more character study, the more intimate version of Bill's segment of this story as compared to the more action-centric representation that we got in the video game. But you're also going to have people that have a valid point that are going to miss seeing that segment of Bill's town in the video game represented into this show. And as long as people express their opinion one way or the other in an educated way, I don't think either side of that argument is going to be wrong. It's just going to be something where some people it works for, some people it doesn't work for. Now, one thing I will say is that anybody that's watching this show and this is their first experience with this story and these characters that don't have the experience or the knowledge of the video games to use as a counterpoint, I'm extremely, morbidly curious how those people are going to take this episode, because I would not classify this as filler. I think that the story and the themes and the things that they execute and they explore in this episode are very important for the overall world and just some of the overall themes of the story, in my opinion. I think they did a damn good job with it, and I got a lot of value out of it. But I could see this one episode of the 9 being classified by some people as the filler episode, only because it's the only episode that does not focus entirely on Joel and Ellie. They're in the episode, but then it very quickly becomes Bill's episode. And so I'm morbidly curious how everybody's going to take that one. That is going to be the one week that when we jump online and discuss it, you're going to see a lot of polarizing opinions. And my final mixed element, it really doesn't have much to do with this season. It's just something that I want to discuss and something that I definitely have concerns and curiosities about, which is how this show is going to progress past this first season. I guarantee it's going to be a massive success. I guarantee it's going to be a critical success. I guarantee fans are going to love it. I guarantee it's going to be a ratings behemoth. This is going to be the next big thing at HBO. There's no chance that it's not going to be. So a season 2 is inevitable in my mind. And they've already talked about it a little bit in some press releases that they're not going to be doing seasons that don't translate the video games directly. So season 2 is immediately going to get into the storyline of The Last of Us Part 2. And they've also said that they're probably going to split the story of The Last of Us Part 2 over season 2 and season 3. And I like that decision because it is a massive game. But I'm concerned about how well that's going to go over, because for those that haven't played the games, there is a 5-year time gap between the first game and the second game. Ellie is a young girl in the first game. She's basically an adult in the second game. And while I'm not opposed to them recasting, I guess, Bella is so amazing as this character, I don't think that that's the way that they should go or that they want to go. And so I'm just very concerned about how you're going to effectively tell the story that is in The Last of Us Part 2 with an Ellie that's only, at least visually, going to look 1 or 2 years older than she did in the first season. And so I just have concerns about that. I don't know how they're going to do it. I don't know if maybe they're going to focus on all the backstory elements to Part 2 to where they're going to fill out that 5-year time gap a little more in season 2, and then season 3 will be adult Ellie's storyline. I really don't know. But as somebody that actually is a fan of The Last of Us Part 2, I am one of those people that loves the crazy decisions that they made. They really worked for me, though I understand why they did not work for some. I want to see that story told right. And I would actually go as far to say I hope they tell it in a way that appeals to more people than the way that they did in the game, because the game is extremely divisive. I just don't know how they're going to do that. And I don't think that they're going to take 2 or 3 years off to do it. So that's the biggest question that I have at the end of this. I'm on board. I am in love with every single thing that they did with this, and I cannot wait to hear people discuss this every single week for the next 9 weeks and just hopefully love it on the level that I did, because I think that they will. But that's the biggest concern that I have, is what next? So overall, guys, I genuinely think this is the new beginning. This is the beginning of a new era of video game adaptations. I really hope studios and production companies and even the game developing companies that probably hold a good amount of these rights are going to look at this adaptation and learn the correct lessons from it. And this will be the Sam Raimi Spider-Man. This will be the Bryan Singer X-Men. This will be the Christopher Nolan Batman Begins for video game adaptations. And now we can finally look behind us and leave that trash era of 20-something years of adaptations behind us and start to see these AAA games, these amazing stories and characters get the love and the care and the attention that they deserve in their adaptations. This was flawless to me. This was everything I could have asked for as a Last of Us fan and more, and I absolutely loved every second of it. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this, please check out my other channel, Cody Leach Game Chamber, for all my video game reviews. I'll put my Last of Us Part 1 review up here for you to check out from that channel. And please like and share and hit that subscribe button, because I'm going to be doing episode review and recaps every week, and I'm also going to be doing live streams with other channels discussing this show as it goes on. Thank you for watching, and as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.